The very first conversation we have here is actually from one of my mentors. Now, as I mentioned earlier on, it was around 9.5, close to 10 years ago when Kate and I, we moved from Tasmania up through to Sydney. Now, there was really three main reasons why we moved, but one of the most important reasons is because I recently was signed by pretty much now the largest agency for professional speakers in the world. At the time it was called O2 Speakers, it's now called Ode. And Julie at the time was overseeing that. And so Julie Winterbottom, which was her first before she got married, she's now Julie Masters. And since then, Julie and her team really coached me and helped me to get into the international speaking industry. They also really did teach me a lot about how to influence, whether it was to keep the attention span of a room of 18,000 people, which is my largest event, but also how to craft like an outstanding presentation, or maybe even how to be that influencer online. And so it was a number of years ago, Julie then moved on from that agency, and now she runs her own enterprise. She now runs one of the hottest podcasts in Australia, if not the world at the moment, when it does come to influencers. Write this down. Her podcast is called Inside Influence. And I'm super excited about today's very first conversation here, which will really help us to get a little bit more of an insight in how we can all become influencers in tomorrow's world. Also, very, very exciting as well to have you here. Come on, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Julie Masters. Yay! Go, go, go! Yes, we love you, Julie.
Hang on, let me just get up these stairs safely. All right.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for your time.
Awesome. Grab a seat. So, Julie, can I first of all ask, obviously this is your second child, I believe.
He is, yes.
He is, yes.
He is.
Oh, very good.
He is. I have a 2.5-year-old at home at the moment. And I was kind of giggling on the sidelines just there because I can remember that first conversation that you and I remember very enthusiastic, very hungry speaker. And we met, and I can remember exactly the coffee shop we met in. And you said to me, "What have I got to do?" And I said, "Well, firstly, you've got to move to Sydney." And then I thought, I'll never see him again. And then, sure enough, I don't know how long. It was literally no time at all. It was like 2 months later. He rocks up on the doorstep again. And he's
moved to the same suburb.
No, well, that's what I was about to say.
Balmain.
Not only, he's like, "Yeah, I've moved to Sydney." I'm like, "Oh, hi, okay, good. Where are you?" He's like, "Oh, I'm just down the road from your office." I'm like, "Oh. All right then, I guess we'd better get going then, hey?" So, you would just talk about doing what it takes. And that's not easy with a young family of three either. So that deserves a lot of kudos.
I think it's kudos to Kate, more like, come on, let's give Kate a round of applause.
Kudos to Kate.
Far out. So, Julie, we can notice an accent. Tell us a little bit more about your journey and how long you've been in Australia for and why you came initially. Tell us, give us the background of your story.
So I first came probably, I would say, about 20 years ago, just under 20 years ago. And I arrived with a backpack, basically. Arrived with a backpack and a dream of hot Bondi nights and marrying a cast member of Home and Away.
Really?
Second bit didn't happen. And I met this lady who, first of all, I arrived. I can remember getting off the plane, and I only knew one person in Sydney. I remember getting off the plane, getting straight onto a train, and coming out in Circular Quay and just thinking, "Oh my God, do people live here? Is this a thing?" And then getting on a ferry and having the same kind of, is this people's commute? I just come from London. My commute looked nothing like this. My commute was like squash in a freezing cold tube or someone felt my bum. And you're so squashed you can't even turn around to see who it is. And, this beautiful ferry and the harbour bridge and then getting off and just thinking, literally within that period of time, it must have been only an hour, thinking, I'm staying here. And I had a ticket onto LA. And I just, I'm not going. I'm staying here.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I stayed with a friend in Manly, and everybody I knew or met was a backpacker, and they were all getting waitressing jobs. And I got a waitressing job, but it was with the firm view of this is just going to buy me some time while I get my visa. And I met Leanne, who went on to be my business partner. And we first met, and she needed a PA. And she had this...
And how long ago, sorry?
20 years ago now.
20 years ago
now.
Wow.
And so she was in a house, and her office was in the basement of her house at that time.
So just very quickly, her name is Leanne Christie. Leanne Christie is basically one of the forefathers of the speaking industry in Australia.
Absolutely.
And, you know, just a total master, a real maverick. So sorry.
No, she is one of the... I didn't know at the time, but one of the premier founding pillars of the speaking industry in Australia and also from a global contribution point of view. Yeah. And especially on the ethics collaboration side of things. So I didn't know that at the time, and I'm working in this basement with this lady, and she said to me, we met for a coffee, and I said, well, I'm just going to put it out there, I need a visa. She's like, okay, so what do you need to get a visa? And I said, I need to earn this much, and I need this much of a commitment from you. And she said, okay, well, that's more than anybody else wants to get paid. Do you know anything about the industry? And I was like, nope. Have you? Because it was helping her sell speakers. She was like, have you ever sold a speaker before? Nope. Do you know anybody in Australia? Nope. She's like, and you want to get paid how much? Wasn't a lot at that point. Sounds very little now. And so she went away and she came back and she said, I don't know you. I've spoken to my husband. He doesn't think I should give you a job. Spoken to my accountant, he really doesn't think I should give you a job.
I haven't heard this story, by the way. I love it. It's a great story.
But I'm going to give you a job. I'm going to give you a job. You have to do, yes, otherwise I wouldn't be here. You have to do all your own paperwork. You've got to sort it out. I don't want to hear the word visa from you. You've got to sort it all out yourself, but I'll give you a shot. And so she gave me a shot. And we started in that, well, she had already had a business for a number of years. She had scaled it back at that stage. And that's where it began for me, in the basement of that house. And the business went on to grow, and then about 5 years later, we decided, which is another story I won't take up space with, but we decided to launch together what was then O2 Speakers, which was the first speaker management company in Asia Pacific at that point, probably one of only 2 or 3 in the world at that point. And that then went on, probably about 5 years after that, to become Ode. And so I ran Ode, and we were business partners through that whole time. And she still runs Ode to this day, and it's done incredible things
globally now,
all around the world.
Yeah, and it is quite amazing. By the way, guys, just very quickly, can I please encourage you all to post online all throughout this event, as you can see there. So it's hashtag STConf19. And so if you're, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, whatever it is, can I please encourage you, let's get the message out there, which would be really cool. So Julia, a number of years ago, then you obviously had a baby, and then you launched. So after managing speakers for like 10, 15 years at the top of your game, one of the best in the world, I believe, at managing speakers, you then made the transition to now, instead of being the back end watching speakers, you thought, wait a sec, now you've got this insight that I don't think anyone else in the world would have. You've seen these speakers and you literally train them how to get into, the stratosphere of the influencing world from a speaker point of view. So you had this blueprint in a way that really no one else had access to. Because it wasn't just 1 or 2 people that you launched many other people, and from partnering with you and the team, suddenly now they're in the top echelon of professional speakers. So you had this insight. So it was a total no-brainer for you to then launch yourself as saying, hey guys, I've got the tools of knowing how to influence others. Is that a fair understanding?
It's really fascinating, actually, to me to hear you explain that, because it sounds like such a flip. And at the time, it didn't feel that way. It was, but the whole reason that the business came into being was to amplify game-changing ideas and game-changing people. That was the whole reason, like the mantra of the business from the I remember sitting in the kitchen table writing the mission statement of the business 15 years ago, however long, and the whole ethos of the business was the right message at the right time, when delivered authentically, has the power to change everything. And that's what started the business. And what I do now just feels exactly the same to me. I have always enjoyed people with incredible ideas. I have always enjoyed breaking down ideas, putting them back together, amplifying them, figuring out the best way to take them to market, the best way to get them the furthest reach possible. And so now I do exactly the same thing, but I do it with the podcast. So I still collaborate with incredible influencers globally through the podcast. And that is really just a mouthpiece, a platform to give other people's ideas.
Tell us a little bit more. Why did you start that podcast initially? Did you feel, fastest growing medium in the world at the moment? You can get deep in conversations. Great way to do it in people's commute. It's like, why was it a podcast? Why not a TV show or this or that? Like, why initially a podcast?
Why a podcast? Yeah. I was going to start a newsletter.
Okay.
I decided I was going to start a newsletter. I had my daughter. I was missing having these kind of conversations with people all over the world, like global level conversations. And I thought, right, I'm going to do a newsletter. And I went out for dinner with a lady who used to work for me and who still works for me in various capacities, Lauren.
Lauren, yeah.
Lauren and I went out for dinner, and she'd worked with me for many years, and I said to her, I'm going to do a newsletter. I'm going to put it out there. I feel like the world of influence has changed a lot since I first started out. I feel like there's this new breed of influencers out there. There's these new tools. And I want to do a newsletter on this new age of influence, what it looks like now. And just like a 20-year-old can, she looked at me and she was like, what, a newsletter? Why don't you do a podcast? I was like, because that sounds like a lot of work, a lot of tech, a lot of that. And she said these immortal words. She said, how about if I did it with you? She said, I'll do it with you.
Wow.
Let's do it together. And she worked on that podcast with me, launching that podcast for the first 18 months of its being for free, just to see it out there. So yeah, she's an incredible human being. And so that's how the podcast came to be. It came to be because I missed having that level of conversation with people. Selfishly, I missed having a reason. When you own a management company, you have a reason to call people. Someone writes a great book, someone does something amazing, and I have a reason to call them. Hi, I run a management company, I want to talk to you. And they'll take your call. And very selfishly, I loved that because I got to talk to people that I find amazing. So I missed having a reason to make those phone calls. I missed long-form conversation. Tweets are great.
Sound bites.
Sound bites are great, and they have their place. But I have always been a fan of the long form. And so I missed long-form conversations. So you take that thirst from me, and then you add in Lauren, someone who was willing to support it getting out there, and that's how the podcast came into being. But I would never, and this is important, I would probably never have pressed go on that podcast if it wasn't for Lauren. And the reason that is important is because I think that there's a part of all of us that doesn't want to press go. Like we had spent 12 months working on this thing. I had interviewed people, and that's another thing worth saying. Probably the first 10 interviews I did never made it. They were so bad, as in I was that bad. The art of questioning is a skill unto itself. And so we had spent 12 months getting these first, probably only 8 episodes ready. I'd probably done 20 by that point, but only 8 made it. And she went on holiday, and she said, right, your one job while I'm gone is to press go. Just press go. And I remember the cafe. I remember sitting there. I had everything ready to go, and all I needed to do was press go. And knowing full well in and of myself that if I hadn't made that commitment to her, my inner voice would have found a reason not to do it. It wasn't perfect. I wasn't perfect. It wasn't good enough yet. It could be much better. And I think that's really important to say, because if you know that you have that voice, you recognize that voice in yourself, then you can put people around, as you are doing, people around you who are louder than that voice. And so, yeah, that's...
It's interesting. I don't know if you guys have seen that, there's a YouTube video that's out there that's been posted on social media a lot over the last few years about this one lonely dancer at like a rave party, and then suddenly then the very first dancer that comes and dances with them, and then suddenly then an entire, like a massive big field of then dancers then come around.
I think it's called the first follower if you want to look for it.
Yeah, the first follower. That's it. Yeah, that's
it's
the
amazing.
One. And it is so true, like who is your buddy? That person that's actually going to believe in you, that's going to cheer you on, that tribe of people around you. So it sounds like Lauren was your very first one. And then so obviously then you launched it, and did you get the traction that you thought that you would? Because from my experience today, a couple of years on from since you've launched, like I now see so many people, and like we're talking about the top echelon of influencers and event managers, HR managers, all the people that need to follow, they're the people that are now listening to this podcast from my perspective. And so certainly you're now influencing the influencers, which is quite extraordinary. Did it take a while to get that level of following and people now anticipating the next podcast out? And what was it like for you when you first launched? Because a lot of people here, they're scared to press go because they're worried that only 3 people are going to listen: their brother, their sister and their mum.
I'm laughing because I don't think my mum even listened. In fact, I can tell you for a fact that she did not. What happened? Again, honestly, what happened? Nothing happened. Nothing ever happens when you first start something, right? Like, nothing happens. Nothing happened. I pressed go. I got on with my day. It wasn't about that at the beginning. It really wasn't about that. I mean, the podcast cost me money to produce. It probably cost me, again, we're in this room together. It probably cost me about $20,000 a year to produce it. So it wasn't about this sudden whoosh of anything coming in. For me, at the beginnings, it was about consistency. It was about, I said I was going to do it, I'm going to do it.
Very good.
It was about, I'm going to show up every 2 weeks, regardless. And that's not always easy when you have young children, when you're pregnant, when you're trying to, we were just saying yesterday when we were on the plane, front load it now until September so that I can have it's not easy to be consistent. It's not easy to show up when you say you're going to show up. And so that's what it was about at first. It was about the consistency of it. It was about the discipline of it. It was about the new skills of it. And then I was going to see what happened. It could have been just a 6-month thing that I loved putting together, gave me an excuse to have some amazing conversations, and nothing happened. And that would have been just fine. Would have been absolutely fine with me. So I think that it's the cart before the horse, really, to say, what were the results? There are no results when you first start. If you're hoping for results, you'll get disheartened very quickly. It's not about that. You stick with it. Usually about the 18-month mark in my experience over the years for speakers, for influencers, for anybody. 18 months is when you'll see results. And that's the honest truth. It'll take you 6 months to get going. It'll take 6 months for anybody else to pay any attention. And it'll take another 6 months for the results of that attention to come back round to you. 18 months. So yeah, if you're hoping to get a round of applause the first time you press go, I think probably I was lucky in that sense. I didn't have that expectation. I've been around too long. So, you remove that
so
expectation.
Yeah.
You have a lot more freedom with what you do.
You guys have heard me talk a lot about if you're faithful with the small, the big will come. And it was very similar with these 2 elements, consistency and then showing up. And so all throughout that first 18 months for you, there had to be times where you might think, oh, look, too hard, I'm going to give up. How did you navigate that voice?
Oh, so many times. So many times. And I think it comes back to that mastery piece again. You don't get mastery unless you face up to the fact that you suck on some level, in some way, at some things. You don't get mastery unless you face up to that fact. And, I had to face up to that fact that I'm really good at some things. This I was not good at yet. Asking an elegant question I was not good at yet. Pacing. I remember the first few that I did, I would just let someone talk endlessly. And then it'd be 40 minutes in and I'd think, we've only had one question. I don't know how to interrupt. And so, the whole thing was a new experience for me. And again, we were talking yesterday about how many times you get knocked back, how many times people said no. to coming on the podcast. It happens less frequently now, but it happened a lot in the beginning. How many times people just didn't show up? There was one we were talking about who was a hero of mine, and my daughter was sick, and I had booked a hotel room to be able to do this interview.
Amazing story.
Booked a hotel room, paid for a hotel room, got up at 4 a.m. to be able to do a call live with, I think it was Boston. And I had followed this person's work for a very long time, and I still think he's incredible at what he does. But he showed up, and he was distracted, and he showed up and he said, right, I've got 18 minutes. And I was so flummoxed that I fudged that interview completely. I got off that call, and I just burst into tears. It's like, what am I doing? My family's at home. You know what? Nobody cares. What's the point? That voice. And there's been a number of those times. Now it's easier because now I get feedback more regularly. So now if I'm having a moment of, it's too much, it's one extra thing, it doesn't pay the bills, now I get feedback from LinkedIn, I get feedback from Facebook, I get people emailing saying, love that latest episode, made such a difference. Now it's easier to take the knocks because you also get a little bit of the feedback. But in the beginnings, it's really tough because you're just taking the knocks. So yes, there were those moments, and yet I'll come back again. If you are doing it for the applause, you will not last long. You do it for the consistency. You do it for the mastery. You do it for the moment in yourself where you have to show up and be seen and have your voice be heard and be conscious about the words that come out of your mouth. You do it for those reasons, and that's sustaining. But if you do it because it's going to be easy, and if you do it because people are going to applaud or like it, that's not sustaining. That fuel runs out very fast.
That might have even come into the next part is, influence in general. Like, if someone was to ask you, decode influence, what would you say?
That's a massive question, Sam. Decode influence. All right, I'll give it a shot.
Well, I look at you as the influence queen. I do. Because you know what has worked with other people, and now it's your name of your podcast.
But that's a good way of saying you should know the answer to this question.
Sorry, wasn't that obvious?
So, decode influence. All right, for me, there are 3 different types of influence.
Yeah.
And every single episode of the podcast, every part of the talks that I give, every element of the consulting projects that we do now focuses on one of these 3 elements. One is inside influence, which is what the podcast is named after. That is how you influence yourself. That is how you influence that voice inside your head that asks you, who do you think you are? That's how you influence your own triggers, become aware of your own triggers. That's how you perceive the world, how you filter what happens to you. So that's inside influence. And that seems like a segue away from the kind of influence that you're asking about. But I have seen way too many talented people, incredible ideas, brilliant businesses, brilliant speakers left on the sidelines because they haven't mastered that part. Cool. How to tame that inner voice, how to answer the question, who do you think you are?
Influence yourself, yeah.
Yeah. So to influence yourself, nothing else matters without that. So that's the first one. The second one is interpersonal influence. How you influence on a one-on-one level. How does someone feel after they've had an interaction with you? How are you able to listen consciously? How are you able to communicate consciously? How you're able to question critically? All of those things make an incredibly influential human being. And the myth with that is that influence is all about how, the words that we say and how we say them. And actually the most influential people I have ever met, that I have ever worked with, they say very little.
They what, sorry?
They say very little. I mean, you would have met half of them. Yeah, they say very little. Yet everything moves around them in an orbit, like gravity. That there's a sense of certainty about somebody that is able to influence on a one-on-one level without feeling like they have to push somebody with their words. So there's that one, interpersonal influence. And then the next one is industry influence, or how to influence at scale. Now, at scale can either be from a stage in front of thousands of people, Or at scale can be how to get traction behind an idea on a global level, how to start a movement, how to run a political campaign. So that part is how to get an idea out there at scale. So if you're going to decode influence, I would decode it, first of all, into those 3 buckets.
Great.
To spend your time focusing on. And each one of those buckets can obviously be broken down further.
So Julie, you're obviously now not only doing your podcast, but also now you are a speaker. You're a keynoter now, which is amazing. I'll give you an idea. Just yesterday, Julie and I flew from Sydney down to Melbourne, spoke at the Crown Palladium Room, which I believe is one of the best venues in Australia, if not the best. You know, that's where they have the Logies, the Brownlows, etc. I think you followed right after me. So
I literally did.
So it was Matt Church, it was me, then it was Julie. Like, these are like top, you know, I feel honoured to share the stage with you two. And so what do you talk about in your keynote? And we'd love to have a little bit of an insight into, you know, some of the tips and tricks and the structure of how you created that keynote. Because, by the way, this keynote now is, you know, being booked constantly, everywhere. So there's something that you've created in a keynote that's working. Can we know what it is? I'm like teach us how to do it. And what's the keynote about?
Well, the keynote is called The New Age of Influence. The New Age of Influence. New Age of Influence. And it is about how influence has shifted throughout my career. So first of all, it starts off with how influence itself has shifted. So influence used to be a top-down structure. It's now a bottom-down structure.
How do you mean? What does that mean?
So if you go back through the eons of time, influence used to look like that. They call it the power pyramid. It's been around since the 80s. It's not a new concept. At the top of the power pyramid, you have the monarchy, you have the government, you have the powers that be, you have the CEO. Underneath that, you have the military or the enforcers of that word. Underneath that, you have the media or the broadcasters of that word. And underneath that, you have you and me, everybody else on the planet. And since the digital age has come about, it's flipped for the first time in human history. And human beings are now the most influential force on the planet.
Come on, that's you.
So, you know, you're looking at increasingly more so, you're looking at an age where human beings can now mobilize at scale more quickly, faster than often governments, military, and certainly the media. And we're seeing that more and more. You know, one tweet can stop and start a revolution. One iPhone can stop and start a revolution. Now, again, I want to make the distinction. We're not talking about power here. Governments obviously have a lot of power. However, that trajectory, the ability to be able to mobilize at scale that fast has never existed before. So to give you a quick example of that, Justin Bieber, the Biebs. Justin Bieber has, I think, 100 million followers on Twitter, which is one social channel. It's 52 social channels. What 100 million followers? Barack Obama has 90. Donald Trump has 60. And CNN has 40. So if he wanted to, he could start a conversation, engage, sell a product, get traction on an idea faster than CNN. And again, that's never happened before. Now you combine that, the speed and scale, with the fact that 96% now of every single thing you consume online, every single piece of information that influences you, and what you consume online now influences 93% of your buying decisions. 96% of it is what we would call, in the marketing world, unbranded. And unbranded is really just a fancy way of saying that it comes from a human being and not a brand. So 96% of our attention goes to human beings now, not brands. And yet we spend $50 billion a year on branding, advertising, and marketing. And, you know, there's this fantastic story that I tell, which is 100% true.
I'd like to.
Which is my mum. My mum's Northern English, and she rang me one day, and she was like, hey, up, love. You're right, darling. And I was like, what's up, Mum? And she said, well, I've just figured something out. I was like, what? She's like, what I do is, when I'm watching EastEnders, what I do is the ads come on, and then I pause it, and then I go and make a cup of tea, and then I come back, and then I press play, and then I fast forward all the ads. And my mum doesn't even have an email account. And, you know, again, the traditional view of marketing, the traditional view of influence, the traditional view of persuasion is threefold. It is you either outshout, as in outforce somebody else. You get louder than everybody else in the room. It's called the gorilla effect. Just get bigger and louder than everybody else. And we do that from an advertising and a marketing standpoint as well. They literally turn up the volume of the ads. So you either outshout, you outspend, you throw more money at it than anybody else, or you out-interrupt. You interrupt more people doing more things than anybody else. Now I studied marketing. Every single marketing strategy, traditional marketing strategy, boils down to one of those three things. And we can't do that anymore. You can't, my mum has figured out how to stop you shouting at her, interrupting her, and spending money to get her attention. If my mum, 70-year-old mother, has figured that out, then, that traditional way of influencing people, it's gone. It's dead. And so what are we left with? If we're no longer left with those things, as companies, as individuals, people who are trying to get ideas out there in the world, we're now left with what I believe to be out-contributing. You can't outspend, you can't outshout, you can't interrupt, you need to out-contribute. You need to out-contribute everybody else in the marketplace.
So does that just then mean just posting more content?
No, it doesn't. It means becoming what I would call the primary translator.
Okay, like the commentator of an industry.
Yes, so to be a primary translator, so to be a primary translator of a topic, to be a primary translator of an industry, basically means that, which is what you do here today, is you go out onto the fringes, you go out to places where I neither have the time, nor the bandwidth, nor the experience to go. And you bring information back to me on a topic that I care about. In my language, in easy to digest bites. That's a primary translator. We have no shortage of information anymore. We have way too much information. Like, no one sat there going, I just wish I had more
information. Where can I get more information?
No, none of us are sat there wishing that. What we need are translators of that information. So if you look, in fact, a good exercise to do, get forensic about this. You look at every single person you follow. The most precious currency you have now is your attention, and we could do a whole conversation not just on that. If you look at who you follow, who you take the time to read, whose podcasts you take the time to listen to, whose videos you always take the time to watch, there won't be many of them because our time is so limited. I guarantee you do it because they translate something important for you. It might be parenting, it might be leadership, it might be speaking. I think in the future we will be influenced by the translators, not the technicians. We have no shortage of technical information anymore.
Very good.
So to become the translator for your target market is the number one tool of influence that I probably know of at the moment.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So what we've just heard just then is part of your keynote and some of the things that obviously, and I'm sure in the room just then, while she was talking, you could have heard a pin drop. We were anticipating every word that she was saying, why she was not only informing us, but also persuading us, empowering us to think, wait a sec, what am I going to do about this? Now that I know this information, what's next for me? Which I really like. Tell me a little bit more about other parts of your keynote that you deliver, and what's the reaction that you're now seeing from the marketplace after they hear some elements of your message. Because even yesterday, I got 5 or 6 people say, hey, that was amazing, Sam, you inspired me. And I'm sure now people are now leaning into to say, tell me more, or, what is working for you at the moment? What is the market asking more from you of?
I think that there's a big trend, and one of the things that I cover in the keynote later on is storytelling, which is something that you also are masterful at. I think that the storytelling piece is something that really seems to engage with people. I think we all struggle to tell our stories. We all struggle to construct a message in a way that's captivating or engaging. If you run a business, you struggle to get anyone to open your emails or your newsletters. So I think that storytelling piece really resonates, and it should do. because the future belongs to the storytellers. In fact, I interviewed Ben Jones.
Yeah, and tell me more who he is.
Ben Jones. Ben Jones is the head of Unskippable Labs at YouTube. So basically the story of Unskippable Labs, you should watch some Unskippable Labs videos, by the way. They're only 3 minutes long. I think there's only 3 or 4 of them. Check them out. I sometimes play some of them as part of the keynote. And Unskippable Labs came about because Google figured out that although they have 5 billion hours of video uploaded to YouTube every single day, 5 billion hours, they had no idea what makes anybody skip. You know that skip button in the bottom right-hand corner that you can skip after 5 seconds? Yeah, and they're selling all this advertising. I skip everything. They're selling all this advertising to all these companies, all these brands, and the brands were asking them, tell us how to make an ad for YouTube, because we have no idea. I don't know if you've noticed, but brands have no idea how to tell stories on these channels at the moment. They were just taking their TV ad and shoving it on a YouTube screen. And Google and YouTube were like, well, actually, we don't know. We got no idea what makes anyone skip or not skip a story. And so they set about Unskippable Labs. What makes something unskippable? And what they discovered was incredible. They discovered that the rawest of stories make the best stories. I'm going to paraphrase the whole thing for you now. Yeah. The rawest stories make the best stories. The most highly produced ones gets people's attention, but has very little recall. So that's one of the things that they discovered. Wow. The other thing that they discovered that Ben talks about, and it's a particular podcast episode, you can go and find it if you want to hear the long form of this conversation. The other thing that they discovered was this thing that he talks about called the Netflix effect, which is, although there's a lot of talk now about our attention spans diminishing, from 10 seconds down to 8 seconds, less than a goldfish now, there's a flip side to that, which is really fascinating, and that is, yes, our attention spans have diminished from an entry-level perspective. So I don't know you, I've never met you before, I've never heard from you. You do have a very limited amount of time to get my attention. He called it the Netflix effect because, Netflix do the ads for the shows that they run. And those ads are very short, they're very punchy, they're very powerful, they get to the point very quickly, they tell compelling stories. But then, what's fascinating about Netflix is after they've got you in with that very short attention-grabbing piece, you will watch hours. Like you will literally invest a weekend of your time not moving off the sofa to watch all of Game of Thrones. And so what does that say about our attention spans? That's really counterintuitive. Apparently we have no attention span, but we'll sit there and we will watch a story for 48 hours. And so there's this really interesting split happening with storytelling now, where you've got you get me in, you give me a good enough reason why I should be there, and I will give you reams of my attention if you tell me a compelling enough story. So yeah, I think that there's a real shift happening in the marketplace around storytelling at the moment and what works and what doesn't work, and even massive companies like Google and YouTube are investing a lot of money trying to figure this out. So when you ask about feedback, a lot of the feedback from corporations comes in around storytelling. Feedback from individuals always comes in about the last piece that I talk about. And it's funny because I put it in, I was doing audience, mainly female audience. I was doing this mainly female audience, and this is my own, this has nothing to do with the audience. This is totally my own inner dialogue, which I questioned and have now changed. I had this inner dialogue that serious business people, the type of people that I work with on a daily basis, CEOs, corporations, serious business people, they didn't want to talk about the inner influence stuff, like the inside influence stuff. They wanted to talk about stuff that had ROI, like how am I going to turn this into money? How am I going to get my audience's attention? How am I going to get them to go from attention to engagement to action? All of that. And so at the end of the keynote, I used to talk about consistency, which is showing up, focusing on becoming match fit, focusing on your mastery, blocking out the noise. That was the end of the keynote. And I got asked to do this primarily female audience, and I thought, okay, that doesn't feel quite right to me. I'm going to talk about what I actually want to talk about at the end of the keynote, what I actually think.
True to yourself, yeah.
Yeah, what I actually think makes a difference. And it's funny how that room gave me permission to do that. And that is certainty. and the difference between certainty and confidence. You know, I spend an hour talking about the tools and the skills and the stats and the marketplace and tech and all of this stuff, and I know in and of myself that unless you're able to make that distinction between confidence and certainty, that you'll do nothing about any of it. And so anyway, I did this end piece between confidence and certainty, and that just went crazy. That one bit.
Wow.
Went absolutely crazy.
Can you just, we've got a little bit of time. What is the difference? What's the difference between confidence, certainty? Isn't it?
No, they're worlds apart. So yeah, I'll be very quick. So basically, confidence, I never talk about confidence. You'll never hear me talk about confidence in a keynote. You'll never see me mention it in a video. You'll never hear me talk about it on the podcast. I hate the word itself. I really have a fundamental problem with. And I think it is because over the past 20 years, I have heard way, way too many people, brilliant, incredible people, kept on the sideline, stopped by a sentence that goes something like this: I will raise my hand, be heard, take to the stage, disagree, launch that podcast, do a video, write a blog, fill in the blank, when I feel more confident. And and it kills me because I can promise you that confidence shows up when we show up. Confidence, it's the result. It's not the ingredient. It's the result of showing up. And it fascinates me because you watch small children. I watch my daughter, and she doesn't expect to be confident. She doesn't have that expectation. She goes in and she expects that she's going to have to do it over and over and over again, and then she'll start to feel confident. And we have those conversations. Do you feel confident? Oh, not quite yet. She doesn't expect to. And somehow, as we get older and we become adults, we suddenly seem to think that this confidence thing should show up before we do. Like that it's going to come in first. Like, you know, angels, confidence. You know, and it doesn't work like that. Doesn't work like that. Confidence is not reliable. Confidence is adrenaline. It comes and it goes. And if you focus on it, you will get derailed so quickly. You know, a better thing to focus on is certainty. To communicate with certainty, to speak with certainty. And to speak with certainty is a downward, I describe it as a downward sensation. Yeah.
That's even how you explained it.
Yeah. When you communicate with certainty, you own the ground that you stand on or sit on, in my case. You own your experience, you own your expertise. The essence of certainty is, with everything I have done, with everything I have learned, with every mistake that I have made, with all of my experiences to date, I give you the best of what I've got today. And if I change my mind tomorrow, if another piece of information comes to light, then I will change my mind, I will adapt. But today, I give you the best of what I have. Now that is certainty. And that's what I want. I want more people honing in on the part of them that can speak with certainty.
Come on, let's give her a hand. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. All right, closing question. Hey, so what do you do for you to recharge your tank? You know, we all know that we've got a tank and you're always giving. You're giving in your personal life, your professional life, always giving. And ultimately, you need something to recharge that tank so you are operating from a place of overflowing. What do you do for you?
That's a really good question. Do you know, I can't answer it. This month has been the craziest month.
Yeah.
Everything just, you know.
But you live next to the beach.
Well, no, we don't. Well,
or close to. Or, yeah, don't you?
Do you know, I'm being honest. At the moment, I'm asking myself that question. What do I do? What do I do to recharge? I mean, I can give you some answers. You know, I have incredible people around me. I have incredible friends around me. I'll watch a movie with my husband and my daughter. I will go for a walk. I can give you all of those answers. But the truth is I haven't figured it out. I haven't, because my landscape keeps changing. And I think it does that for all of us, right? Yeah. What I used to do when it was just me versus what I do now that I've got a family, versus the energy that I have now that I'm pregnant, versus whatever energy I have when he arrives and I've got a newborn plus a toddler, plus a business, plus a podcast, plus speaking. You know, it is a moving beast. And I think the best way that I can answer that is to say, I am trying to, on a regular basis, take time out to ask myself exactly that question. Given this landscape, what do I need? Because the last landscape has now changed. So I don't know. My last flight is in 2 weeks' time, 3 weeks' time.
That's the Perth, isn't it? Are you and I in Perth?
No,
do you
we're
have
in
one
Perth,
after that?
and then I've got another one after that.
Yeah, right.
And then I was just saying to Kate yesterday, then I'm hoping to sit down and ask myself exactly that question.
Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Julie
Thank you.
Marston.
Thank
you
you.
so much.
Incredible.
Thank you so much. You know, she came all the way. Come on, let's be upstanding. Let's be upstanding. She came all the way from Sydney to Melbourne straight to here. We are so grateful for you to share with us today. We are absolutely honoured. Thank you so much.
An amazing thing you have created.
Very awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much. Cheers.